I recently built the Pirate's biggest fanboy, me Ardito. This is our newest free companion that every single class is going to be able to obtain. And I must say, they did a fantastic job with this one. I'm a fan of essentially every version of this companion, with the exception of maybe Musketeer. I think the Musketeer one is a little disappointing, and I'll get to as to why a little bit later. But I do want to talk about two specific companions. Number one, obviously, the man, the myth, the legend, the man of the hour, Ardito. This is our new companion. Number two, I actually want to go over Godbeard for a little bit, because now with the new epic rank, we get a new epic point at level 75, and now Ratbeard can actually learn essentially like 3-3-3 for specific epics that you may want to utilize. And I would say you have two choices. Choice number one, you got the repel borders, hold the line 3, and maybe even the first strike 3. And what exactly will that do for you? Well, what that will do is repel borders, reducing accuracy, fantastic. Hold the line 3 reduces dodge, fantastic. It's going to be great for his kind of tanky build that you usually want to go for Ratbeard. And the extra one is first strike 3. The reason you would like first strike 3 is going to be fantastic on enemies that have hides. Now, it's not going to just automatically reveal a hidden person, like in comparison to, I believe, the new version of, what is it, Jim Matherson or Bat Matherson? One of those two companions, where it has the Hound ability, or I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it will detect hidden enemies within a specific range. This one will still work pretty well against enemies that attack Ratbeard specifically with a hide. This makes it a lot harder for them to be able to utilize said hide against Ratbeard specifically. So it's fantastic to have. The other option is going to be Cheap Shot 3. I actually like Cheap Shot 3. This can potentially force enemies to be frozen for that specific turn, and it's fantastic for the reasons that you can buy yourself potentially a little bit more time to set up for your attack phase. So usually you will be given maybe like around 1 to 2 rounds for the attack phase, as that's how long enemies take to get to you. But now we can talk about potentially having from 2 to 3 rounds in total for your planning phase until you get towards your attack phase, if you were to give Ratbeard Cheap Shot 3. The only thing about this is that it's still an RNG chance. It won't always happen, but it's the other issue being that he's not going to be tanky enough usually to be able to utilize this. So I would say if you want to rock this type of setup on anyone, it's probably going to be on support classes like Privateer, where you can just give him shields and stuff. I feel like that will work on him fantastically. But those are your two options now for Godbeard. Ardito, though, I love this companion. Base kit wise, I think it's fantastic, and that's why I think he's good for every single class, because his base kit is already solid. The main difference is going to be epic abilities, and also the fact that the Witchdoctor version has more powers than it does epics. But from what it has initially, for every single version, you have the power cut down, which is going to be 50% of the target's current HP. The second thing that I really like is Sweep the Legs. Now, by a 9, or rather a 3x3 radius, this companion can stop enemies for that specific turn. It's fantastic in situations where you want to buy yourself more time for a setup. It's great for situations where maybe let's say the Nuzlocke setting, right? Some of your companions are about to be dead. Enemies tend to be very aggro. If an ally happens to be at low health, those enemies are going to charge straight at you. So a power like this from Ardito will prevent enemies from doing that for that specific turn, and it buys you more time to either assist, run away, or finish the job. Fantastic all around. And the reason why I like Swash's version is because you can actually use the Swash version with a hide, and as long as the enemy doesn't have first strike 3, which only a handful of them would, it's great in that sense. because now you can actually utilize cut down without worrying about specific crowd control type of epics like, you know, repel borders 3, or more importantly, hold the line, which will prevent you from even getting to that specific enemy that you want to get in the first place. I have Ardito as a more basic chainer build with Bladestorm 5, but that already makes him extremely strong. I even gave him Turn of Tide 3, so he can have a little bit of extra dodge, since you're not really losing much by giving him some extra dodge. But this is essentially what I gave him for talents. It is possible I could have probably traded some dodgy for maybe some more agile so he could potentially do more damage, but this is essentially the build I gave him specifically. For the Buccaneer version of Ardito, I did change some things up. He does have access to Vengeance Strike 3, so I did indeed give him Vengeance Strike 3, Bladestorm 5, Double Relent, and Turn the Tide 2. The reason for this is because I want him to get hit. Maxed out his strength, gave him a little bit of armor. That way, it's easier to proc stuff like Vengeance Strike 3, which is an epic where you do want to get hit specifically. But fantastic for Buccaneer, mainly because of chaining ability. My least favorite version of Ardito is actually going to be the Musketeer variant. Unfortunately, I don't really know what to do with this companion in the Musketeer variant. I would say one thing I would probably consider is maybe have him be a little bit more of your basic chainer. That way you can have an agility based Ardito that is essentially your basic chainer. However, it's a bit of an awkward situation because he has the epic known as Gunstinger. Now, Gunstinger is giving a chance to make a bonus attack if the enemy is ranged. So essentially, any kind of musket. This is supposed to be like an anti-musket version of Ardito. And the problem with this is that at the stage you get him, at this point, a lot of Musketeer enemies have access to Overwatch 5, knockbacks and all. And the chances of you actually being able to utilize this is very low. If you were to get a rank 3 of Gunstinger, what it will do is that it could potentially poison Musketeers, which, like, that's great, I guess, but it's not as useful as I will hope for it to be. So, this is the one companion, and I feel like this should go for every single version of Ardito, where I personally think that you should be able to get the ability similar to what the Privateer from the new pack companion that's going to be coming. It should have a method of sacrificing some epics in exchange for some powers. And I would say for this version, maybe give him some more anti-musket like powers. And the sacrifice will be, oh, okay, well, you're not going to be able to proc chains as much, or you might have to sacrifice a little bit of your build. That way you can have powers that predicate to that specific playstyle of companion. So in this case, for this Ardito, it's supposed to be like an anti-musket build, but the way I see it, it's like a poor man's build, because I would just use something like Rooster Cogburn if I really wanted to be anti-musket. Rooster Cogburn having access to True Grit 3 is very useful because he could potentially stun. Ardito unfortunately suffers from the fact that the crowd control epics like Overwatch 5 exist, and it's just unfortunate. So that's the only critique I will give for this version of Ardito, but his base kit is absolutely solid. Alright, I am here on my Privateer, and this is my build for the Privateer version. I made him, once again, kind of like your basic chainer, but with access to Repel Borders 3, so I can get a little bit of that accuracy down. I think that's actually pretty solid to have. You know, it's potentially a free hit, essentially. Reduce accuracy, you know, it's overall a fantastic build. Access to Bladestorm 5, so with will buffs, as I made him will based. It's going to give him some damage boosters, and overall, he works phenomenally well. One thing I wanted to show that's interesting about Ardito with Privateers is how you can actually use Concentrated Fire to your advantage, making the target take 50% more damage for 2 turns. The thing I really love about this is, with Ardito's current power, you can have him do 50% of target's current HP. However, if you were to use something like Concentrated Fire to boost that damage, We're talking about doing 50% of what 50% is. To kind of clear up some confusion, let's say that the target had around 100 health. Using a power like cut down is going to be doing 50 damage because that's 50% of that current HP. Now, if you were to use, for example, concentrated fire, that's going to be doing 50% of what cut down is already doing. Cut down is already doing 50 damage, so 50% of that is 25 damage. If you were to add the two together, theoretically, you're going to be doing around 75% of that current HP, or in this case, you do 75 damage. And I think that's really cool. Obviously, armor and stuff like that is going to be countering it, but you're essentially doing around that range. The jellyfish currently has 35, 95. I'm gonna apply concentrated fire. And Ardito is simply gonna be using cut down here. So remember the number of 35, 95. And we're gonna see the total damage. $839 and whoa! Whoa! Wait a minute. That did a lot more than I expected. That jellyfish has to have like 0 armor. Yeah, as you can see, it does a lot of damage. So it makes Ardito a fantastic companion, especially for a privateer. It makes him a fantastic companion for enemies like the beast, if you want to farm the beast to get the amulet. Because the beast has around like what, 20, 30k health or so. So having someone like Ardito, you know, just go after the beast with concentrated fire is going to do an insane amount of damage. You can actually farm the area much quicker. It's fantastic. All right, finally, we're at my most favorite version of Ardito. It's going to be the Witchdoctor variant. Now, the interesting thing about the Witchdoctor variant is that he is the only version of Ardito where you can actually sacrifice a epic grant for the sake of a power. In this case, the power is going to be Mojo Javelin. So what I did here is I gave him a bunch of will and a bunch of spooky because ideally I'm going to be using him for the Mojo powers. I'm not really going to be sending him towards enemies unless I really have to. Ideally, I want the enemies to come to me. So what we have here is hold the line. I gave him 2 ranks, that way enemies are actually forced, if they're within range of Ardito, to just stay still for that specific round, giving me an opportunity to use something like Mojo Blade, Reaver, or Javelin. Javelin, I can honestly use it once the enemy is in range. And the reason why I gave Spell Power is because he's going to be very fantastic for Old Scratch to just kind of buff him up quite a bit. And he can use this to do an absurd amount of damage overall. And you can give him like a generic build of like, you know, accurate 4, dodgy 4, rough, tough 4. Or you could do what I did and just gave him a bunch of will, gave him a bunch of spooky, and just utilize these. Because you might as well. He has the opportunity to utilize it with Hold the Line. So that's what I'm doing. And we're going to test it here. I did make him a general chainer with like the use of Blade Storm, giving him Blade Storm 3. That way if I boost him off of will, it's going to be based off of will and nothing more. But I don't really think it's as necessary. And I can just straight up utilize going like the Javelin route or like the Blade route. Alright, here we go. So obviously they're not in range right now. The closest enemy is going to be Dewey within 4 range. So he's not close yet, but he will be soon. But for now, I think we're just going to hold still. Or we could do some free damage, because we can. But yeah, these fights actually end very quickly with this version because of how insanely good Mojo Blades and Javelins are. Especially with this companion. We also have Blorg with us as well. I'm going to be showcasing the Crown's Companions a little bit soon. I feel like for a lot of them, they're pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to showcase some stuff along the time. Maybe we'll be in the crab tunnels because it's a lot easier to test things in the crab tunnels than doing these secret bosses. But it's just something to think about. Alright, here we go. So, we're just going to do some hits here. Obviously, keep boosting. And Mojo Javelin can reach all the way over here with this jellyfish. He doesn't have access to Witch Hunter, so we can just freely use this whenever we like. And now, with one boost of Scratch, instead of doing around 1,000 damage, I'm doing 2,000 damage. Specifically 2009. Shout out to 2009. Don't know what happened, but something must have happened at that period. Go for a little bit of a poison, because why not? And the fight should be over extremely fast. Because Witchdoctor is very OP, especially with stuff like this. Oh, I should be doing more than that as well. Take a look. Boom. He does have magic resistance though, bear that in mind. A lot of the Witchdoctor enemies do have decent bit of magic resistance. So while it won't work as great against Witchdoctors, it's still an extremely solid overall power to use on pretty much almost anyone else. Even with witches, it's still pretty decent because it's free damage. But yeah, notice how like the round ended extremely quick. It's awesome. Unfortunately, with that movement reduction, that's gonna be pretty bad, especially since these jellyfish really like to not move like at all. But luckily, I did the poison before, so it should be fine. The fight should still be over relatively quickly. Now, here's what I'm gonna do. He can't really move, sadly, but this is my boy. Wait, what? Oh, that's my jellyfish. I was like, wait, what am I looking at? I was like, no, this is my jellyfish. You're good. Alright, we're done. Extremely quick fight, especially with the fact that I have cut down still. So I'll still be able to do 50% current HP. That could be something I use first, and then I can use a Mojo Blade or a Mojo Javelin next. And it just works super well. But yeah. Overall, I gotta say, this companion is great. I love it for pretty much every class, except for maybe Musketeer. I think the Musketeer one's the weakest one of the bunch. But what I would recommend for the devs, if they're listening here, is personally take a page out of the book of like this companion, for example. You can essentially give him any epic, well, not necessarily, but you can essentially sacrifice an epic for the sake of getting a power. The Privateer companion from the new pack does exactly just this, and I feel like this should be the same thing that the devs do for every version of Ardito, where they have their own set of unique powers they can utilize at their disposal in the sacrifice of an epic point. So you can sacrifice getting yourself that Bladestorm 5, maybe you could like get a Bladestorm 3 instead, and with that, you can get like 2 new powers that could be pretty useful for this version for a different playstyle of Ardito. And I feel like that's like the way they should go about every version of Ardito. But as it stands, he's a very solid companion in base kit. I just kind of wish that the Musketeer one was better because it's supposed to be anti-musket, but it's kind of not great for its quote-unquote anti-musket. But that's all I have for today's video. If you guys did enjoy today's video, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you haven't, join the Frenzy family, we would love to have you here. And as always, to everyone watching, remember to stay frenzy, and peace.